Ever since the European Championship, I've been toying around with some different decks in Edison format. Blackwing gets a little stale after a couple hundred games, so I wanted to try something else. To beat the top 3 decks, I think you need to hit some specific criteria in your deck building and how the deck functions as a whole. You can't just play a deck where you want to get to turn 7 and then you can kill them, or then you can establish your combo, because those decks are just way too fast. So in order to be able to beat Blackwing, Frogs and Vayu, you need your deck to be able to not only deal with cards like Icarus Attack, the other traps in the Blackwing deck, Kalut. You also need to be able to beat Rykos when you're playing against Vayu, as well as the other bombs, like have an out, maybe to Dark Arm Dragon, return plays, burial pushes with their Vayu effects, but also not make too big of a board to where if you're playing against Frogs, you're just losing to Ab-Zero or Archaeus. Of course, in Game 2 and Game 3, you know what you're playing against, you can alter your side deck and your game plan to beat those decks, but particularly in Game 1, which I believe is very important to win, to be able to insulate yourself from the sackiness that may come in Game 2 or Game 3 if they draw a really good hand against your average hand. Being able to have the Game 1 win really helps with that, so even if you get unlucky or they get particularly lucky in those following games, you still have the Game 3 to where you can win out. And there's very few decks in Edison that can do this, handle all of these aforementioned problems, while still being a good enough deck to beat the rogue decks, because you're gonna play against GB, Lightsworn, Fairy, Dragon, all these other decks in Edison because it's such a diverse format, even though these top 3 decks are definitely one tier above. I've been looking a lot at the Fairy deck and the Dragon deck. I think those decks have a lot of potential, just because of Quagmire Dragon in the Dragon deck, and Arstrod Christia, as well as the hand traps in the Fairy deck. I really like that you're able to lock out special summoning, so you don't have to worry about Gores. And usually the games against Blackwings and Vayu where you do lose is because they drew their bombs. So be it Blackwings drew Whirlwind along with enough monsters to push for game, or Vayu drew Return, Burial, Dark Armed, or any combination of those along with their average hand of maybe Rykos, a Greffer, and a discard. Maybe they can do like Plague into Brionac, then dock the Dark Arm Dragon and push for game. And it's very difficult to beat all of these decks, as well as the rogue decks, if you're trying to do a fair game plan. That's why a lot of wins in Edison have been from these top 3 decks, or decks that can do above and beyond, like Dragon Turbo, for example. A lot of the issues I've had with the Fairy deck, though, is that when you're playing the Fairy control deck with like DD Warrior Ladies, a bunch of recruiters, and trap cards, you run into the issue of either not being able to summon Christia because they didn't leave a monster for you to crash into, or they have prisons for your recruiters, so you can't get to 4 Fairies in graveyard consistently, or you're playing the Chaos Fairy version and you're losing even harder to deck Devi because you have less counterplay against it, and you're losing to cards like Oppression and other trap cards because you can't really play a combo deck like that in Edison because the card quality is not as high. Decks like Dragon Turbo get away with it because you have a lot of bombs like Avarice, Heavy, Trunade, along with the pushes of the Dragon cards, which allow you to attack for game. Or you run into the other issue where you are able to establish a Christia, but you're not able to apply enough pressure afterwards. So they go set 2 or 3 back rows against your Christia, and then do you attack with the Christia and run into prison? Probably not. Do you commit another monster that you maybe added back off of the Christia? Sure, you can do that, but then you might get Icarus, TT'd, Mirror Forced, even if you put the Christia in defense. There's a whole lot of issues with that game plan because you're not putting them on a clock fast enough. And when you give Blackwings 2 or 3 draw phases to out a Christia, they're usually able to do it. And for the Frog deck, you have a lot of take cards like Brain Control. You have cards like Soul Exchange post side, which can just tribute off the Christia. And Frogs being one of the better matchups because they do have way less outs than Blackwings or Vayu to a Christia, but it just doesn't end up being enough. So how do we solve these issues? How do we put these decks on a clock or we can kill them super fast without going to the chaos route, which loses to deck heavy and oppression way harder, and you have the same issue of a bunch of normal summons in your hand. And when you're not playing any trap cards, you're maybe playing only 3 or 4, you can't really get into a grind game because your opponent is not going to fear you. I think I found a solution to that problem, so let's jump into the deck profile. So to start off with the monsters, we play 3 copies of Archlord Christia, 3 copies of Dimensional Alchemist, 3 copies of Shining Angel and the 1 Nova Summoner, 3 copies of Herald of Orange Light, and 2 copies of Honest for the fairy monsters. So it's 15 in total, which gives you a pretty good chance of making the Orange Light live, as well as being able to get Christia to 4 names pretty quickly by being able to crash your recruiters, or just playing the long game with the D-Alks and maybe honesting over a couple of cards, be able to manipulate your graveyard to get to 4 fairies that way. I don't think there's a reason to play less than 3 Christia, because you're really trying to see this card. This card is your win condition, and if your deck isn't able to summon Christia early enough, the deck is not good enough. So you have to build your deck to be able to summon Christia essentially, and back it up with these kind of cards, and use the D-Alks and the recruiter cards to be able to facilitate Christia, as well as get your value going in the early game. Then for the other cards, I'm playing 3 copies of Cyber Valley. So I think this card is very underused in Edison format. It being able to be a good starter, because you can go normal summon Valley turn 1, and Frogs, Vayu, and Blackwings doesn't really have a good answer to this, outside of maybe taking it with something like Brain Control or Mind Control if they play it and use the effect for themselves. Usually they just end up attacking into it, which fuels up your banished zone for Dimensional Alchemist, so he becomes live when you summon him the following turn. And if they don't attack into it, because they don't want to commit a monster, maybe they're playing the Vayu deck and they don't want to commit a Armageddon Knight or a Dark Griffer, so you can crash your recruiters and summon Christia. So maybe they just go and set a Raikou and pass. Then, potentially, if you have something like a Mind Control, being able to take the Raikou is very, very strong. Or just summoning a monster, using Val's effect, banish both, draw 2 and pass. So they're in a weird spot, because if they flip the Raikou to mill 3, they're not popping anything. And if they're just summoning Armageddon Knight or Greffer and going for damage that way, they're still playing into the Nova Summoners and Shining Angel. So I think this card is very good in Edison format. I think a lot of people should consider playing this card in more decks, at more than just 1 copy, because it's actually really good to open with. And heading into a board, if you have any of the take cards like Mind Control or Brain Control, it's very good at dealing with their cards and drawing 2 and getting deeper into your engine, as well as fueling up the banished zone if that's relevant for your deck. I think there's plenty of decks where you can for sure see them playing this card, because they're not normal summon reliant. Like the fairy deck is normal summon reliant, but it being able to buy you a turn by skipping their battle phase if they do decide to attack over it, and then playing into your recruiters is exactly what you want. Then I'm playing 2 copies of Ancient Gear Golem Dragon. We'll talk about this in a moment. And 1 copy of Blackwing Gale. As I mentioned before, I'm playing the Brain Control and Mind Control, so being able to pair any of those with this card against Blackwing is very good. Also, I'm siding Sirocco's to beat Deck Devastation Virus, so I have extra utility post-side for this card. Also against Frogs, being able to make a Black Rose Dragon or Ancient Fairy Dragon is very good. For the spells, I'm playing 3 Gear Town, 1 Mausoleum, and 3 Terraforming. So why am I playing Ancient Gears in my Fairy deck? Well, the answer is, a lot of the games that you're losing is because you're drawing Christia too early without a way to summon it. So I wanted to play 3 copies of Trade-In to be able to discard either Archlord Christia or Ancient Gear Golem Dragon to draw 2 new cards. Just having 5 targets is plenty, because you're able to recycle either of them with Dimensional Alchemist, seeing as they will likely get bottomless, or the Christian might get deprisoned. It usually ends up in the banish zone, and then you're able to recur it back off of Dimensional Alchemist and normal summon it again with Mausoleum, or discard it with Trade-in. I decided to play max of Gear Town at 6 copies, because I really want to see multiples of them as fast as possible, because I want to kill my opponent turn 3 if possible. I don't think you want to be able to get into a long game with this kind of deck, because you don't have Black Whirlwind, you don't have any graveyard resources, so you're just losing out if you're trying to grind against Frogs, Vayu, and Blackwing. I want to kill them as fast as possible, and I think these cards allow me to do exactly that. Another problem with the Fairy deck is when you see Christius and you don't have a way to summon her, she just ends up being dead in your hand. With Mausoleum, you can pay 2,000 to be able to just normal summon it, and if they kill it, like with Regeki Break for example, or Mirror Force, Torrential, it goes to the top of your deck, then you can pay 2k, normal summon her again, and they have to deal with it yet again. Being able to go Gear Town, Mausoleum, summon Christia, and attack for 8800 damage through Gorse or Trag or Fader against Frogs actually comes up more than you think. Especially as you get into later turns, when maybe you've done some ship damage with your Recruiters or your D-Alks, because their turn 1 usually ends up putting them on no monsters if they're going Swap, Frog, Bounce. Being able to do 58 with just those 3 cards is very, very strong. And this card is also very good in the metagame, because it attacks into Blackwing and Vayu boards very well, because they can't use Deprison or Mirror Force. And it's also very good against Titanial, because you're able to attack over her, seeing as she's 28, this is 3,000, you can just attack over her. And then you still have to deal with a 3,000 attack body that you got essentially for free. So that's the reason why I played those. Also additionally, when you get Deck Devastation Virus, being able to summon a 3,000 attack beater is very, very good. I think the games that you do lose to Deck Devi are where they Deck Devi you and you can't stop them from capitalizing off of the Deck Devi. They now have perfect information. They know exactly what kind of trap cards you have, unless they were set previously. Let's say they Deck Devi you turn 1, worst case scenario, right? They see all of your trap cards. They know you have Prison and no other spell traps, so they can just make a Bryanak and bounce your Prison and attack for game, for example. But being able to summon a 3,000 attack beatstick they have to deal with, and being able to run over their Greffer or whatever else they may have, is very, very good. For the take cards, the Mind Control and Brain Control, as I mentioned, very powerful cards. For the spells, I have MST and Heavy. MST being able to pop your own Gear Town in the battle phase to summon an Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon, and Heavy Storm being able to clear their back row and summon an Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon is very, very powerful. For the traps, I have Call of the Haunted, Torrential Tribute, Mirror Force, Dust Shoot, and Return. I decided to just play these 5 because I'm able to side out these when I put in Royal Decrease for the trap decks, while still keeping the very powerful cards like Dust Shoot and Return. So I didn't want to play too many trap cards like Bottomless or Prison in the main deck. Also, I'm trying to kill my opponent. I don't want to play a long game with trap cards. I just want to blow out traps where if they play into them, they might lose the game. And being able to side into more trap cards against something like Amaryllis, where I don't want Royal Decree, is also very powerful. So that's why I'm maining a couple of them to have the option of having more post side. Return is obviously very insane because you play Cyber Valley and eventually they're going to have to bottomless your Gajiltron Dragon or Christian, and then being able to just return it back and attack for game is very good. For the extra deck, it's fairly typical for a Fairy deck. I'm playing the 1 Armory Arm, 1 Android, 1 Cataster, 1 Brionac, 1 Flamvel Uruquizas, 1 Goya Guardian, 1 Armor Master, because I'm playing the take cards. If you take a Gale, you can make this, or with your own Gale. Ancient Fairy Dragon. This card is very powerful, being able to pop your field spells to get another one. Do keep in mind that this does not make a Gear Town mistiming if you choose not to search. So you can pop a Gear Town, gain 1000 and still summon Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon. But if you search, you cannot summon as it misses its timing. 1 Black Rose Dragon, 1 Dark End, 1 Avenging Air Knight Parshat, 1 Thought Ruler Archfiend, 1 Colossal Fighter, 1 Stardust, and 1 Chimertic Fortress Dragon. So the side deck is where it's a little bit more interesting. As I'm playing the recruiters, I get to play a lot of tech cards that you can summon off of the recruiters, and you need some way to beat deck Devi post side. The ancient gear cards do help a lot, being able to push through a DDV, but you also want some monsters in your deck to where they don't get hit by deck Devi. So usually I tend to side a couple of them out. Against, for example, Black Wings, I usually do not keep in all my copies of Herald of Orange Light. You can side out a couple of them because you're putting in other fairies like the Consecrated Light. This card is very good against Vayu and Black Wings, being able to summon it off of a recruiter or protect it with Royal Decree, or having to back up your Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon with a Consecrated Light is also very strong. I'm playing 2 copies of DD Crow. This I do side into Vayu in this deck, just because when they do their Grepher play turn 1 to summon an Armed Wing for their DDV, you're able to Crow the Vayu when they attempt to summon Armed Wing, and then you can summon a Recruiter, crash into their Grepher, and drop a Christia, or just being able to control the game from that point. Because they're dropping a lot of their cards from their hand, and when they're doing this play turn 1 where they summon the Armed Wing, you know for sure that they have deck Devastation Virus, because they wouldn't summon Armed Wing turn 1 otherwise. So being able to Crow it, and then you just play around the DDV by making your game plan a bit different, because you know if they summon a Sirocco or Armed Wing, they can then chain the DDV to your Mirror Force Torrential and tribute it off. So you just have to keep that in mind. Perhaps you play a little bit more aggressively, because they've effectively used 3 of their cards. They've used the Dark Grepher, they've used their Vayu or Sirocco that they pitched to send the second one to be able to summon the Armed Wing turn 1, and you know they have DDV, so 3 of their cards are now known. So you can play a bit more aggressively in that way. 1 Proto Cyber Dragon. This is a card I don't see a lot of people using in their Fairy deck, which I think is a big mistake. Being able to crash your Recruiter into a Machina Gear frame, for example, and summon out this, it counts as Cyber Dragon on the field, so you can contact Fuse into Chimera Tech with their entire board. So you can effectively search a Cyber Dragon with your engine. It's very powerful. I don't play regular Sidra because I didn't feel it was good enough, and I can beat DDV in other ways. I don't need Cyber Dragon to beat Deck Devastation Virus. Then I'm citing 2 copies of Fossil Dyna Patches that follow. Against Frogs and Amaryllis, it's very powerful to have a board wipe that you can set. They think it's a Recruiter, so they're free to attack into it, and it ends up being a Pachi, blowing up their entire board. Also, being able to normal summon this against Frogs, along with your Ancient Gear push, being effectively 4th and 5th copy of Archlord Christia. 3 copies of Sirocco. As I mentioned previously, I'm citing Sirocco for Blackwing and Blackwing and Vayu. Being able to just summon a Sirocco and attack into their monster at a 2000 attack bonus is very powerful, especially if they have a large field of Black Wings, because they're trying to play around Christia, for example. They want to have a lot of monsters in attack, so they can use Icarus attack while still keeping a Blackwing body on the field. So if you summon something like Consecrated Light, they still have the monsters in attack position, they can maybe synchro them away. So usually Blackwing tends to keep a lot of the monsters face up against you, and you can really punish them with a Sirocco. Also, this does not get hit by Deck Devastation Virus, which is a big thing, and pairs well with the Gale in the main deck. 1 My Body as a shield. 2 copies of Royal Decree. This card comes in against all the trap decks, such as Black Wings or Vayu. 1 Karma Crit. I wanted a card against frogs that deals with Vanity's Fiend, Absolute Zero, and Dupe Frog. Also being able to take a Treeborn Frog in the graveyard. When they have one in the grave and summon back the other one, you can just Karma Cut them both away and you don't have to deal with them anymore. It's a very versatile card in that way. I don't really care about dealing with their back rows. It's mostly the monsters that I am concerned with, and then Karma Cut, being able to banish them, is much better than spinning a Dupe Frog to the top of their deck or popping it with Regeki Break. And for the last two cards, I'm playing 2 copies of Bottomless Trap Hole. I wanted something when I'm playing against the combo decks, or something like Amaryllis or Lightsworn, where I'm able to just stop whatever they're doing and buy another turn. I think against the trap decks, I would much rather have something like Royal Decree. Albeit Bottomless being very good into Blackwings, I would rather have Decree and stop them from playing rather than try to trade 1-for-1 with their cards. Because I actually want them to have their monsters on the field, because that means that I can crash my Recruiters into them, or Dialk can attack into a Bora at a +1, or Shura. Being able to crash with the Shura, get back a guy is also a +1. So yeah, I really like Bottomless against the combo decks in Amaryllis.